All right, hello. This here is Marq Scheyder. I am here with Geoffrey D. Calhoun of the Successful Screenwriter podcast. Very happy to be back for an AMA. Pick your brain about the writing process and all of that. So thank you so much for having me. You ready to get started?
Yeah, man. Thanks for being on the show, Mark, and doing this again. I always enjoy your questions. They're always really thoughtful.
Thank you. Thank you. Really appreciate it. So this is now our third time together here. So I've tried to kind
Yeah,
of cover different aspects of kind of the writer's journey from like the beginner to someone who's just getting their feet wet. And now we'll
100%.
get a little bit more into the weeds with that. But I figured I'd circle back to the beginning because I love asking about routines because, I think about a lot of the Stephen Pressfield books. He talks about the difference between someone who's really going pro versus kind of the amateur. So I know you're very much into your routines. You've got your music playlist. But you've also been at this for a while. You've got this great career. What are some ways that your routines have changed over the years, or maybe any new things you've added in recently?
They just refined, really. I mean, the
Mm-hmm.
routine is the same, but it is very, like, if I'm in the car and my music playlist comes up for my writing, I shut it off because
Mm-hmm.
I have to be disciplined and I won't listen to any of that music, if I'm actually writing because I want to trigger my brain to, make sure to focus that way and not get distracted. And that's really what it is. It's being distraction free, sitting my butt down and hitting those keys. And I mean, I remember it would take, 8 hours for me to write 1 to 2 pages. And now in 8 hours, I can whip out 19 pages.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just a muscle. You keep it working, you sit down and you write every day. And if I'm not able to write that day, I'm thinking about writing. And that's
Sure.
very true. Like in the
Yeah.
car, or if I'm at the grocery store and I'm working on a pitch, I might go into a busy lane and then pitch the person behind me. Like
Nice.
just always kind of working that muscle.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I was just watching a masterclass. I don't have the guy's name off the top of my head, but he was just saying that you have to kind of have those moments like in line at the grocery store where you might have something kind of fall into your lap or where you can workshop something versus, always being on our phones, which is of course a temptation, but that's great. I like that a lot. I also had that the other day where something from my morning wake up amp up playlist was playing in the car and I was like, I love this song, but I should probably pause it. Like this, need to keep the association strong.
Yeah, it's a real thing, man.
Yeah, that's great. All right. So another thing I've been thinking about a lot lately is this idea of kind of building a second brain and how we have so much information out there and you never know when an idea is going to strike, but it's also very rare that you're going to have the idea strike or read the perfect quote right when you're about to use it. So how do you kind of keep organized when it comes to all of the digital assets we have available to us for when you might be like, ooh, this is a really cool quote. I might want to use this later. Or just like, this feels like half of an idea and I don't want to forget it.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm a notebook everywhere guy, and it's always a
Okay.
legal pad, and it has to be a yellow
Mm-hmm.
legal pad. If it's a white legal pad, it doesn't work the
Sure.
same. I can't explain it to you. So I have
Yeah,
them
and then you won't
everywhere. I
use
got
it.
them in my car. I've got them in every room in my house. Yeah, there it is. Yeah, Mark's represent. I got it next to the bed. But if I'm at a film festival and I'm at a panel, I'll use the Notes app.
Sure.
And I'll sit down and I'll just take notes on the app of stuff to reference later. Even years later, I'll go back and be like,
Mm-hmm.
wow, I remember that panel. Oh, look at this guy. It's awesome. And then kind of take little cues. But yeah, always referencing those notes and then going back or even writing it down and just letting it simmer in the back of my mind and not even having to go back to the note, but just the process of writing it down is a great way to remember in and of itself.
Mm-hmm.
So
Oh, it's
yeah, so
so
that's kind
true.
of what I do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was just mentioning before we started, I just started a tour guide position. And so we have to memorize a script, but what's really helped me is to watch a bunch of other people do the same tour, but then only write down the salient information that I wouldn't have remembered. And then that kind of just distills down to, because
Yeah.
the rest will hopefully start to stick. So that's great. But I think it can be sometimes overwhelming where it's like, oh, I read this great book, but what's actually actionable? And then there's this quote that I heard over here. And then this random idea I got in the grocery store. It's a lot. So that's great if you're able to then know, I'm going to go back to that pad and find that note I was looking for.
And not to be overwhelmed with material. I'm working with a client
Mm-hmm.
right now who is just in the weeds, man, because they're an expert in their field. So their understanding of the material, the content, and that they want to
Mm,
discuss is so vast that they can't find north.
yeah.
So it just came down to almost like quick word association after working with them for a whole session. I said, okay, I'm going to ask you this quick question. What's your main character struggle? And then they would answer it, and then they would start tailing off. You go, nope, stop. what are you trying to say with the story? And then they say what they wanted to say with the story, and then they started to trail off in the way. No, stop. Just right there, right? Because that's what you have to do. You either take an
Mm-hmm.
axe to all the content or you take a scalpel and kind of
Mm-hmm.
finely tune your way through it. But it is so easy to get overwhelmed in content, especially if you really know the craft
Mm-hmm.
or what you're discussing. So it is about like, how do I weed these things out and focus on what I want to say, not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily what's cool or what's interesting.
Yeah, finding the story within so much information. And we've talked about that a lot just in terms of adapting real life information because it's kind of endless. And
Yeah,
I was working on one that we talked about in our last session, but it had to do with cryptology and cryptography in World War II. And
cool.
it
Yeah,
was so cool. And I had so much fun because I'm like one of those few people that actually like math. So I loved it. I loved researching for it. But it was a challenge to then be like, how much do I actually need to basically teach the audience about this so that the end of this scene is exciting because they have the
yep.
context without just being like, well, let me give you a last math lesson because you're going to love how this cipher works, And so it was kind of a fun challenge, but that's where I just, gave it to people to read and they were like, yeah, no, I feel like you taught enough to that I can lock onto it. But
That's
there's
awesome.
like endless information. So I think that then becomes what separates like a really good writer would be that you're able to ask those questions like you were doing with that other person, be like, okay, what's their goal? What's
Yeah.
the challenge here? Let's stay focused, keep it on the humanity, keep it on the emotions too.
So
That's
on
all
this
fun part of
script,
it.
did you write a character that was geeky about math?
Yeah. I mean, it was
Awesome.
sure. I mean, someone that was just kind of taking advantage. They were basically in this burgeoning field that didn't exist yet, and so it was kind of them just figuring out how to be useful and also wanting to learn new things. And so I could very much connect with the character in that way. It was a lot of
Yeah.
fun.
See, and that's an authentic representation of you
Yeah.
that's gonna read as a real character with depth. And
Mm-hmm.
I love that. That's gonna be a cool character. I'm excited for your
Cool.
story.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. So let's see. I wanted to jump in now to kind of this next part of the writing process. So let's say we're
Okay.
someone who has written a couple of screenplays. We're getting some feedback from people. We're getting, and I'll circle this around too because I got some great feedback from your organization as well. But maybe they're not quite at the point where they're really placing in some of these writing competitions because I feel like that's a really good next threshold of like you can feel
Yeah,
that validation from
it
it.
is.
So what is some of the advice you'd give to that or like how would you kind of speak to the writer who there's this kind of quote where it's like if you've actually written a screenplay you're above 90% of people in Hollywood that just talk about
Yeah,
writing a
well,
screenplay.
that's true.
So they're through a lot of that where they're actually starting to kind of put in the work but they're not at that point where they get that kind of same external validation that maybe its own dark night of the soul as it were. What would you say to those people?
I mean, as a director of a contest, I have some unpopular opinions if you want to share them, and I'll get lit on fire for this, but I'm comfortable with it. Contests don't matter, but they also
Mm-hmm.
matter.
Mm-hmm.
So as somebody who runs a contest that's like the top 15 in the world for screenwriting, a contest is great for you to find out where you fall with your peers. Contests that offer real prizes like we do at Script Summit, we offer a development package where we actually get you in front of producers, managers, and agents. So that's legit, and we do it through Coverfly, so it's vetted. Um, those are the contests that are awesome. Contests that aren't offering prizes like that, which is common, what are you getting from them? Well, what you're getting is you're finding out where you fall with your peers, and that is respectable. So, like, if you don't place in a contest, it's not the end of the world because I know people who have won nickels and didn't option their script.
Mm-hmm.
I know people who didn't place in nickels and are getting movies made.
Yeah.
So I'm saying like they matter, but they don't matter. It kind
Mm-hmm.
of depends. It's an avenue, but it's not the avenue. I know some writers who are like, if I'm not placing in nickels, I'm not good enough and I should just quit. I'm like, hold on a second. It's an avenue for helping you find success. It's not the avenue. I mean,
Yeah.
being a top 3 in nickels is amazing and that can really help your career, but that's not
Mm-hmm.
the only reason.
Yeah.
Here's my other unpopular opinion. Contests are a bell curve.
Mm.
So, you're first starting out, you're at the bottom of the curve, you may not be placing. You'll get so good that you'll start winning everything, and it'll happen.
Mm-hmm.
It happened to me. I've watched it happen to other people. Eventually, and this is what no one will talk about, you'll get so good that your writing will be beyond the readers and you'll stop placing.
Uh,
So I know a writer who's at con repping stuff, has big stuff coming out, and they quit placing in contests. And they're like, what the hell's going on? And I'm like, and then I read the script, I'm like, this is incredible.
yeah.
It is so nuanced. It is so deep. They are missing it because the readers aren't there. You're above their level. And it happened to me. I had gotten to the point I was winning everything. And then a year later, 2 years later, I didn't win anything. And I'm like, okay, I know I'm not a worse writer.
Yeah.
So something's going on. So that happens. So, if you get to the point to where you're winning and then you're not winning anymore, you don't need to be doing contests anymore.
Sure.
You need to be getting your stuff out there and finding whichever avenue is right for you, whether it's, going locally or if it's, querying and pitching. Yeah.
Love it. Excellent. So yeah, that's certainly an avenue. Another thing I want to focus on was the idea of getting feedback. So I love asking you about your different rewrites, your 12 stages, but what about getting external feedback? Can you talk a little bit about that? Because it's of course important to get different perspectives. It's very different having your mom read it versus a friend read it, that kind of thing.
Don't go to mom.
And also diversity in that group too. And then from there, I want to segue into the idea of like when to kind of stick to your guns. But can you talk a little bit about like your ideal readers?
Yeah, so like I do notes, I give feedback at wefixyourscript.com. And when I started a million years ago, when you got notes from people, it was brutal and toxic. And they would tell you things like, you should not be screenwriting. And they were serious and like, I paid you money for this,
Yeah.
So when I got into giving notes, I was like, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to be a mentor. I'm going to be your leader. And at the same time, let's come together and find the best way to not only fix the script, but to deepen your writing, right? Classes in session. That's how I treat my notes. And it's been popular and people have really appreciated it. There's two avenues, like when you're giving notes and when you're getting notes, right? Getting notes it's kind of easy. So where do you get notes from? Obviously somebody that has a reputation. So I would go online and Google whoever is giving you notes, because who are they in the industry? Are they a screenwriter or are they a producer? Because there are screenwriting gurus out there who are producers, but they're not writers, and they're giving you notes. And, their note is going to be different from a screenwriter's note because their note is going to be more from production. So you have to keep that in mind. So they're going to be thinking budget. They're going to be thinking set pieces. They're not going to be thinking other, like a screenwriter will be giving you notes on character development. They'll be giving you notes on theme. They're going to be going deeper into that stuff. So who is giving you the notes? What is their reputation? I'm not saying that a producer giving notes is bad. I'm just saying it's a different perspective. Yeah, and you have to be ready for that. You have to want that note.
Yeah.
How long have they been doing it? Have they been doing it for years? Are they just starting out? So things like that. Giving them to family and friends. I mean, at first you're going to do it because you just don't know any better. Obviously, you don't want to give it to mom. My problem with giving notes to family and friends is when they start giving you ideas to change the story.
Right.
Because that doesn't help. Yeah. They think they're helping you, but I'm not asking you to write my story and tell me how you would do my story. I'm asking you to help my story improve in whatever way that you believe it's lacking. And so that's another way of when you're receiving notes is, are they trying to make my story their story, or are they trying to make my story better so that it can get options? Because those are two different things. Two different ways of looking at it.
Yeah.
So then there's always, giving it to 3 different people and then looking for the one note that's the same.
Yeah, exactly.
That's like basic advice, right? But that is important to know, and for anybody who hasn't really gotten into this yet, like look for the similarities, not the dissimilarities, because they're all going to be different. I mean, it's subjective. Totally. But if you see one note screaming at you, it's telling you that's right. Now, if you get a note from somebody that is exceptionally personal, like they're attacking you, and you can't figure out what the hell this person is saying, peel the layer back. So step away from that note, step away from that process for a day or so. Go take a walk or whatever you do, decoupage, find your happy place, right? Because you're going to be crushed. And then look at that note again when you're from a detached, less emotional aspect where you can critically analyze it. Say, okay, what is the note behind that note? Because what I found is when someone is giving you a note that is brutal or almost like toxic and aggressive, it's because they don't have the capacity to explain what they feel is missing.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't have an understanding. So like they know something is wrong with the story. They
Mm-hmm.
can't articulate what's wrong with it. So I'm just going to say it sucks. Or
Mm-hmm.
this character is boring. Or well, it's boring for a reason. This character sucks for a reason. They're flat. Their dialogue doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have any depth to them, right? So but you have to do that from a less emotional perspective, and it takes a bit of empathy when you're reading that note, where you have to be like, okay, who is this person, where are they coming from, and why are they
Yeah.
saying? Also, when somebody reads your script, it's 2 hours of their time, so
Yeah.
you want to be appreciative. You want to be like, thank you so much for these notes, I really
Yeah.
appreciate it, because nobody wants to read a script.
Yeah.
Nobody does.
Yeah.
Even if you're paying somebody like me to read the script, we don't really
It's
want to
work.
read it.
Yeah.
I'd rather be playing PlayStation or
Right.
writing my own stuff. But I'm
Right.
gonna do it because I want to help you, and I'll
Mm-hmm.
sit down and I'll do it. So you want to be appreciative for any notes you get, even if they're quote bad notes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when giving notes, which is a whole different
Mm-hmm.
process, when you're giving notes, you have to figure out what is the best way for you to give notes. Some people do on the margin notes, which I think are great.
Okay. Yeah.
Other people will, so like they like PDF edit the
Sure.
script, and they just write on the margins. I think that's awesome. That's old school
Mm-hmm.
screenwriting right there. Other people will do like a 1 to 2 page kind of like reply to your script, which I don't like because I feel so much
Mm,
gets lost in that. If you're reading 90
yeah.
pages, you're not going to remember everything. So they give you like the highlights of what they think's wrong with it. I'm like, it doesn't do much for me, but if it's
Mm-hmm.
not too expensive and they're just kind of trying to give you the play by play, okay. My notes that I give are, I got these notes when I first started screenwriting from the screenwriter who was a television screenwriter in Australia who did me a solid and read one of my first scripts. He gave me these notes, blew my mind, and I've done it like this ever since. They are bulleted and they are by page.
Mm,
So it'll
that
say
sounds great.
page one, it'll say my notes at wefixyourscript.com. Page one, your title is off, right? Your title isn't centered
Sure.
or whatever. I mean, like from title page and then page one, your action blocks are 6, 7 lines. Let's consider cutting those down to 3 to 4. We
Mm-hmm.
have introduced 6 characters on page one. That's too many. Your readers getting lost in characters. They're overwhelmed. And I just do that every page
Mm-hmm.
throughout the script. And I
Mm-hmm.
love it. And I've
Mm-hmm.
had such great feedback from clients because they're like, I go to page 35, I know what to fix.
Mm-hmm.
And then I
I
just
love
take a
that.
real, yeah, and I just take a real, like, I detach myself. I'm not emotionally invested. But if I read like 10 pages and I don't have notes, if I go 30 to 40, I'll make a note on page 40 where I go, I got lost in the story for 10
Yeah.
pages. That's awesome.
Yep.
No notes on that, so
Mm-hmm.
then I know where the story's getting me. Now the reader knows, like, okay, so for like 10 pages, this dude was just reading it. He
Mm-hmm.
was into it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll do everything from yeah, my concepts to theme to character and all of the background behind them, and if they're developed enough, and I will include all of that in the notes. And then I will give, see, I'm a guy that I grew up, I don't like to present problems, I like to present solutions.
Mm-hmm.
So the tricky part for me is when I'm reading a script and I see an issue with story, or I see an issue with character, or some kind of redundancy that's going on with dialogue. I'll go in and I'll be like, okay, here is the issue. Here are some ways to correct it. And I like to give a few different options. And
Yeah.
I try hard not to be like, I don't want to make this my script, so this is how I would do it. I want to be like,
Right.
here is a way to correct this issue with your story. Here's another way to. So I present multiple options, really in a way to stimulate your creativity,
Mm-hmm.
so that you see that note and you go, oh my God, okay, I can do this. I can make her a werewolf robot
Yeah,
instead of a
connect this over
vampire.
here. And yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So it's a lot of fun, and that was an actual note I gave. So
Yeah.
um yeah, it was a wild script. So yeah, giving notes like that is
Hmm.
really different, and to come from a place where you're not just reading a script to critique it. You're coming
Yeah.
from a place where you're reading a script because you're invested in the screenwriter. And that's how I give the notes. So it's a very heartfelt, like, I care about what you're doing, so I'm not going to be like emotionally like rude and toxic to you and be
Right.
like, okay, how do I give this note to promote you being better?
Hmm. Yeah, I love that. And I was going to talk about the idea of just working with a writing partner too. It's a lot of those same things of
Oh
having to
man.
be so, I think it's really a relationship that needs to be like worked on so that you can find the ways to best communicate
Yeah.
with each other. So you can not only be good at giving feedback, but also good at receiving it because it's incredibly personal. And I know like one of the first ones I worked on a script with my brother and we were working on a comedy and it's so much fun, but it's also maybe the most uncomfortable when you have to be like, I don't think that joke is very funny. Or like, and having to both say that and be like, I think we can write something funnier here. That feels very personal. You know, I can't imagine doing stand up, but it's like you
But
can get
sure.
better. Yeah, you can get so much better. And I think what really helped us in our kind of writing relationship was getting specific. And so I'd be able to be like, okay, I love like 90% of it, but this phrasing, it gives it more this
Yeah.
connotation. So how can we like really zero in? Because then
Yeah.
otherwise I can kind of feel like, oh, I don't really like that line. Like we can get more specific and we would even just start to write in like, we're going to have a beat that's like this here. Let's come back to it. And that helped us keep
Yeah, that
not
works.
stop up the momentum. But yeah, I think that's really so important what you were saying about the idea of being good at giving feedback because you're trying to be constructive without just saying, you know, it's bad or let me rewrite the whole thing for you, but also being good at receiving it and know where they're coming from and know
Yeah.
how to take the feedback when there is maybe a big thing. It's because it's so nice when you get like the bulleted list that it's easy fixes. But of course, there's sometimes not ones where like I had feedback for one script where it's like they just don't want this character to die. That's kind of a big shift, but it ended up being a good one too, and I worked through it. So being able to have that humility, but also knowing when to kind of be like, you know what, I'm going to stick to my guns on
Yeah.
this one. Yeah, that's great. I like that a lot.
Well, I think
Oh,
co-writing,
please, yeah. No.
I mean, if you
That's
don't
great.
mind,
Jump
I'd
on it,
like to.
please. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Well, one of my good friends, Joanne Hess, and we've collaborated on a lot, and I love to write comedy with her because the scene is working when they crack up.
Mm-hmm.
I
Oh, it's
mean
like the best feeling.
that's the tell.
Yeah.
If I'm writing with her, and I write like a banger, and then I look up and she's like, meh. I'm like, okay, what does it need? And then she comes in, but
Mm-hmm.
that's taking the ego out, right?
Yes,
You have
exactly.
to pull the ego out because
Mm-hmm.
it's not about you and your writing. It's not about them and their writing. It's about the story,
Absolutely.
right? So what
What serves
scene,
it best?
what beat, what button on the scene serves the story best? And if
Mm-hmm.
I do something and you lose your on it and it's hilarious, we're great.
Mm-hmm.
If I do something and you're not laughing, how do we do it? And then you just come together. It's a team. But
Yeah.
before I co-write with somebody, I have they don't know this. They think we're just having a meeting, but really what we're having a chemistry meeting.
Oh, nice.
I'm trying to see if you and I are going to jive. If we're
Mm-hmm.
not going to jive, or I can tell you've got a huge ego and you're not able to pull yourself away from the script,
Mm-hmm.
we're done. I'll just
Yeah.
be like, yeah, I don't know if I'm going to move forward with this script, but it was a pleasure. They don't
Mm-hmm.
know we're having a chemistry meeting because I want to
Mm-hmm.
meet them. So that is part of it. But yeah, that's why I do writer duet is because when I'm writing and you're right there with me writing and at the same
Yeah.
time as part of that software, I'm watching you.
Yeah.
I want to see your reaction.
Yeah.
And if it's gold, it's gold.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, co-writing like that is great, and yeah, you just have to do what's best for the story.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That's great. Because hopefully that's what you both want at the end of the day.
Yeah,
I wanted to circle back on one thing and then I'll jump back to the idea of kind of sticking to your guns. But you said something that was really interesting about the idea of the difference from getting feedback from a producer and having that different mindset. And I think what's so cool about screenwriting is that you really do have to consider the entire movie at once in your head.
yeah,
But you also, at the end of the day, have to just succeed at your job. And something we talked about last time was
yeah,
how when I'm coming from it as an actor, I want to write every parenthetical. I want to overdo telling them how, but it's like, that's the actor's job. I'm just the writer. So I would imagine, the longer you've been at this, the more you can be considering a million things at once. Like, oh, this also would be a cheaper
yeah.
location than that. But where do you kind of find that balance of like, but at the end of the day, I'm writing a great screenplay, and then the producer's going to take it from there. Where do you kind of find yourself falling in that?
Man, it's experience. It's
Mm,
experience. Like once you get something optioned and you end up on set and you're watching actors perform your work and you're watching a director interpret your words, then you really start to understand how much is going into this thing, this little thing that you wrote, and it changes your perception when you move forward. I mean that's when I option something and I'm on set for the very first time and I'm watching him shoot and I was like, okay, this is what it's about. So I need to be, maybe I don't write a scene where somebody's shaving every couple of times because I have to have a fake person's hands in there. You know what I mean?
hmm
Like
hmm
you start really seeing all of the fat that you can cut from your script
Yeah.
because you're watching it. But then at the same time, you're seeing how you can write a scene in a specific way and a director will interpret it a different way and not a wrong way. They
hmm
just interpret it that way. So then you can start to understand, okay, maybe I could be a bit more specific in a sense that they can see it the way I wanted to see it. Or
hmm
contrarily, I can be more broad and let the director just be artistic.
hmm
So yeah, I would say get on set
Yeah.
with something you wrote, whether it's like a short script or something cheap, and really watch everybody do it. And then you're going to have a new perspective on your screenwriting. You will level up.
hmm That's so cool. But it is like a process of kind of letting go and
Yeah.
letting it be. Yeah.
Oh,
So I would
yeah.
imagine it probably changes with each project a little bit. Like maybe there's something you play a little closer to the chest, or maybe there's something that you feel like you can kind of leave a little more bare bones and be more interpretive. But I would imagine with your experience that it's definitely something where you can be factoring in a million things and then still ultimately making those various decisions on the script. That's got to be so cool to see your own stuff
It
get made.
it
But
is cool.
yeah.
One thing I've noticed is like for some reason, I mean I love my main plots, but my subplots are like my babies.
Okay.
So like they'll come through and they'll change the main plot a bit. Everybody gets rewritten.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Part of the job.
I have, Alan Ball, I mean, the best screenwriters in the world. John August gets rewritten.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but for some reason, they tend to leave my subplots alone. And so I was
Ah,
like, and so I get excited and I'm like, oh, that's nice. They didn't change my baby.
yeah, it's
Because I
preserved.
put so much thought into my subplots to make sure they reflect everything in the story. And people will have notes, directors, producers, actors all have notes. And so the main plot inevitably will shift a bit. Sometimes a little, sometimes a lot. But I'll be like, oh, subplot's the same.
Mm-hmm. All right. So I wanted to kind of continue on with this idea of like getting that feedback, knowing when to stick to your guns, that kind of a thing. So if it's all right with you, I'd love to jump into a case study with some of my writing.
Hell yeah.
All right. So one of the ones that I had submitted this year is a zombie movie, and I'm a huge fan of the genre. I really think of them as, they're ensemble dramas that are kind of either masquerading as horror or maybe masquerading as like a thriller, that type of thing. So I really wanted to lean into that idea and set you up for a zombie world, but ultimately just have it be a very character focused
This is a
ensemble
horror
piece.
film. The genre is horror.
Well, I would put it into an ensemble drama, but it's a zombie movie.
It's an ensemble drama that happens to have zombies in it. Okay,
Yes,
I
that's
got
kind
it.
of,
I'm
yeah,
on
that's kind
board.
of the right. That's basically
That's
the
fine.
tongue in
Yeah,
cheek type of thing where it's like you think you're getting set up for this, but really, whereas for me as a lover of the genre, I think that's what it's always been. Is really what there's kind of this idea of you've got the monsters outside, so then you don't necessarily notice that there are monsters inside too, in the sense that like who are the good guys and the
right.
bad guys? Well,
Yeah,
obviously it's the monsters. It's like, but actually it was a really cool process. I'm really happy with the script. I'm going to keep working with it, of course, but it was really fun to write during a pandemic when, not that that was a fun time, that's probably not the right word, but the idea of like when we're in periods of immense stress, how do we treat each other? When the world seems like it's falling apart, how do we keep up normalcy? Like all these different kind of
okay.
ideas were floating around anyway. But something that I did as kind of a conceit of that genre factor is my third act is really an emotional third act versus a big zombie showdown type third act. And that's
Okay.
something that I had gotten feedback on. And because for me, something that also bothers me about zombie movies is that it kind of seems like the only way you can get tension is by people being wildly unprepared. And it's like if you were to live in a state that has hurricanes, you'd board up your windows. Like, and yet in a zombie movie, it's like they're coming through the windows, and we've been in an apocalypse for 3 years. Like, I wanted to write kind of about people where it's like, no, they're actually very well prepared. They've been at this location. They're batting down the hatches. So I basically have a third act that is wrapping up all the character stories. I'm getting their arcs, their progressions. They're the ones that are changing. But the kind of things that are going outside in terms of fighting off zombies is almost like not as big of a deal. And that's kind of the point in a way, because it's more about the people. But I did get the feedback where they're expecting this big kind of showdown, and I'm thinking like,
Okay.
no, they actually were pretty well prepared, but it's more about how this character had this realization and things like that. So that's one where I got the feedback and I was like, yeah, that's kind of the point.
Can
So
I bump in for a second?
yeah, absolutely, jump in.
All right. Yeah.
That's
Just
pretty much it.
whenever you have an Act 3 issue, it's an Act 1 issue.
Mm,
Okay.
yeah.
So this reader's perception of I'm expecting a big zombie blowout moment at the end,
Mhm.
one, that's informed by genre expectations,
Right.
right?
Which I'm very
But
consciously changing on.
right. But two, it's okay to be provocative. In Act 1, is there somehow a moment with these zombies where it's perceived that things can go out of control?
Yeah, I mean, there are tense moments with the zombies, but it's also still starting off with the same characters, and the types of things that they're dealing with are very much tied back around and I think completed in the
Yeah.
third act.
So there's not like a
So I think it's
Chekhov's
very
gun
much
or anything that you're setting up there?
no, it's. But I can also, I mean, I'm trying to think of how do you tell people that it's going to be about the people?
Well, if they dispatch
I feel
these
like the things that I
zombies,
really set up right at the beginning, because I actually started it as a short film just with that first set of scenes.
yeah,
Those are things that I circle back to, and I kind of tie up those loose ends based on the characters that are in this situation and what they're emotionally going through. So it really kind of feels like, the zombies are just like a curtain to this going down.
there's set dressing.
Exactly. And that's kind of the conceit of the whole thing, and something that was intentional. So I kind of like that in the third act, that it's really not about them shooting more zombies or that kind of thing. And also it's a reflection of the characters because I start with a group and then they end up finding a house with other survivors. And that's kind of where a lot of the rest of it plays out. And the survivors that have been in that location the whole time are like very well prepared. They're stocked up. They're safe. They have defense mechanisms in place. So that's kind of my conceit in it as well. Is like, people would, I mean, how much did people prepare for Y2K? It's like people would be ready for this, and we never see that in zombie movies of people being like, yeah, no, I'm prepared.
I think this works. I just need to know, what is your theme other than like people are evil, like just so I know, because we don't want to give your story away. So what is your theme?
My theme is basically, how do we deal with stress? How do we treat each other in difficult times? Where do we kind of
that's fine.
So again, that's kind of where it parallels the pandemic, because it's like when it feels like everything's falling apart, how do we still fall back on our, like, the little comforts and the little ways that we still try to feel human,
right.
And so then also how do we,
when you have that stress, right? Now, tonally, you want to splinter that among your main plot and your subplot. So if you're going to very simply, one person is going to handle the stress and they're going to change from the stress and become a different person.
Yeah.
In a better way, right? Another will change in a worse way, and one will self-destruct. Yeah. Those are your subplots. So I'm not trying to make this my story, but if you have somebody who's going to self-destruct from stress and you're in a zombie apocalypse, what would they do?
Get themselves killed, probably.
How?
I mean, just something essentially suicidal with the risks that are out there.
So if this person is among humanity and they think people are monsters, and we don't want our zombies just to be set dressing, but this person is too scared to be alone, what would they do?
Go out somewhere that's unsafe.
There you go. Now you have your moment that meets that note where you have your big zombie moment. Right?
Yeah.
And that could actually be a beautiful ending for a character. You people are so toxic. I'd rather be a mindless fucking zombie.
Yeah.
And around you people, because at least I have a community over there. Right? Yeah. And then that works that note in thematically. And so that character, when you're building them from Act 1, it would all be about them trying to find community. So they're the peacemaker
Mm-hmm.
or, an enabler.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're trying to keep the group together until they realize, wow, there's no hope here.
Mm-hmm.
These are just my thoughts. I mean, I haven't read the script.
Sure. Yeah, there's so many different directions you could go with it
Yeah,
around that theme. Yeah, I think that's kind of what I ended up doing for whatever like tagline type thing was essentially the idea of like, yeah, they're the demons outside, but it's really our inner demons that we're having to fight right now and how that plays
absolutely.
out. So,
People are monsters. I was just watching this
yeah.
show on Netflix called Outlast because I love the Alone
Oh,
show where you're survivors. And so an
okay.
Outlast is like Alone, but you have four people. And instead of trying to brave the wilds, they just started stealing other people's sleeping bags. I'm like,
Oh,
people are gonna freeze to death. And I'm
yeah.
like, I don't want to watch this show.
Yeah.
I wanted to watch people persevere through strength and will against Mother Nature, not just watch some dude steal somebody else's sleeping bag and call it a day.
Yeah.
So,
But
yeah,
yeah,
I
we
don't know.
can.
Does that kind of meet your note a little bit?
Yeah, that's all great to know, and it's good for me to remember to tie back to subplots too, because I have an ensemble and I have different relationships that I'm working with, but I don't necessarily fit it into overarching and sub, and I think that would be helpful for me to make sure that's all kind of working together. Because I love my characters and I really like the way that they progress, but to kind of still think of it from that structure, I think would be helpful to revisit from that side of things, and then to just
Yeah,
find out where like, no, this actually is a point I want to make. I want you to be kind of surprised that it went well versus always having to be but I guess it ties back to that idea of like an audience will accept a coincidence if it helps the bad guy but not the good guy kind of a thing. Like there's sometimes where we're less uh, forgiving when it comes to something being easier or whatever, so I have to
I
kind of weigh that too, because I'm kind of having fun messing with the genre but also loving it in the way of like, no, I mean I love zombie movies and I think these people would actually be really well prepared versus like
yeah,
when you watch a character and then they like trip and fall and you're just like, come on, like I wanted it to have
I
that.
think it's great. I love that you're trying to break genre. I
Mm,
love that. What we don't want is we don't want people reading this thinking, oh, they didn't have budget for zombies.
yeah, yeah,
See, that's what we don't want. And so,
right.
what I would
So that's what I need
like
to
if
kind of
I was,
solve for is like, no, this is
yeah,
intentional, but I also don't want you to be
yeah,
disappointed. Like this is being written by someone who
right.
loves this genre, but I love it because it's really about the people versus,
No,
the
I
details of
think
the
that's all.
monsters.
I think that's all good. And then I would use whatever interaction your characters have with the zombies, whatever
Mm-hmm,
those interactions are they have with them, should should reflect who they are. So the
mm-hmm.
guy who gets under stress, he's exceptionally brutal towards the zombies, maybe even enjoys it. It gives us
Sure.
a hint into his
Yeah.
character, right? The one, and I'm not saying you're going to use this character, but the one that's more sympathetic
Mm-hmm,
could almost be reverential towards the zombies because she understands or he understands, they understand they are people. They
mm-hmm,
had families. These are mothers, daughters, sisters, brothers.
mm-hmm,
So maybe they're not as into stabbing a zombie into the forehead as the serial killer next to him.
mm-hmm.
So really, the interaction with the zombie will reveal character,
Yeah.
which then again makes them less of a set piece and more of
Actually
the
using them
environment.
instead of just, yeah.
Yeah,
And what I love about that too is I've had characters that are just trying to numb the pain, numb the boredom, numb the frustration,
yeah,
and so they're drinking just to kind of get through. And then that could be, you could just see a zombie that's totally just like, zoned out, like not like
I
numbed
love
out,
that.
not
Yeah,
present. Like there's such an obvious of like, oh, I'm actually alive and I'm doing this to myself I'm
yeah,
basically turning myself into a zombie by not coping.
I love
That's such
that.
a
That's
great visual.
brilliant.
That's it's just your idea, yeah, but that's such a
Well,
great
that's
way
you.
to still
You
make
came up
use
with
of the
that.
zombies so that they aren't just kind of set dressing, but it actually, why zombies? Why not any other kind of monster? To actually make use of that.
Yeah, I mean, if it's
That's
going to
awesome.
be there, use it in a way that
Right.
that reveals character, and I think you're going to get a lot out of it. And then you can also, like, if you look at this isn't a zombie film, but if you look at like Amityville, right? The house in
Mm.
Amityville
Hmm.
was a character, right?
Right.
So you
Right.
could do the zombie horde or group or whatever it is treated as a character as well as a force of nature.
Yeah. Yeah,
right?
it's almost
So
like if they're a reflection as a microcosm of society of the survivors,
yes,
the zombies reflect another representation
yeah,
of humanity.
or even of a collection. So you could have
Yeah,
zombies moving like murmurations of a bird or in packs, and so
yeah.
you start to create the character there of the zombie horde. You could
Hmm.
single out one zombie if you want. Romero did it in one of his zombie films.
Uh-huh.
You could single out a zombie and use that as the reflection, but if you're able to get a little horde or pack going, I think
Yeah.
that gives it a little bit more feeling of community and tribalism that we're seeing within
Hmm.
the survivors themselves. So
Yeah.
it's
And
just taken at that level.
right, and he does that in Dawn of the Dead too, where they're like, "Why are they all coming back to this mall?" And it's like if there's something
Yeah,
inside of them that's drawing them back, and there's no more
yeah,
room in hell.
yeah,
The dead will walk the earth. That's still a representation of the collective, and it's about consumerism and things like that. So that's awesome. That gets
absolutely.
me
They're at a
really,
mall. You're right.
yeah, that gets me so excited about ways I can
Mindless
still
consumerism.
make the most of this genre, because I do love this genre. So yes, I'm kind of playing with it, but I also still, because that was kind of the more common feedback I got. It's like, well, there should be more zombies, and I'm like, but that's the point. It's
Yeah,
about the people. And so I was kind of fighting against that feedback, but I think I can kind of still very much have it be this character drama, but still get a little bit more juice out of what the genre itself can
right.
provide. So
Yeah, I wouldn't fight that note.
yeah.
I like to take a difficult note and be like, okay, how do I write the shit out of this moment?
Hmm. Hmm.
Without
Give them what they want and
compromising.
also not feel like I'm
Yeah,
giving up. Like, okay, well, I'm just going to
that's
cave,
the
and now
challenge.
there's going to be a lot of machine guns, and you get your happy ending. There you go.
Yeah, no. No, I
Yeah.
love like, okay, let's take this note and let's make something out of it that's meaningful.
Hmm. Yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you so much. That feedback is super helpful. I'm all amped up about it. So thank you.
Oh man, I'm happy to help. I'm glad that you got a little something out of that. It's hard to give a note when you don't read the script,
Oh,
but I'm
of course,
glad
of
glad to
course.
do.
But it can be really fun to even just talk on this higher level too. So
Oh
I
yeah, yeah.
appreciate it.
This is why we
But
do it. Yeah.
yeah, well, that was the end of my question. So anything else you wanted to kind of circle back on from this conversation here? Or
No, man, Mark, you're a badass screenwriter. I really appreciate you
thank
coming
you.
on the show. Like, I love your questions, so I annoy you and make you come back on.
Please do.
And keep it up. I'm so glad you've got the bug. I'm so glad that you're really taking this as a craft and really
Yeah.
diving into it. I'm excited for your zombie comedy. It sounds cool. I love how brave you are breaking genre. That's so
Thank
great.
you. Well, I want to send it now in because I had sent it in for Script Summit, but now I want to do We Fix Your Script, because I think getting that, I'll do kind of another pass through of it, certainly, but I think
Yeah,
getting that bulleted page by page would be enormously helpful. Something a little
no
more specific,
pressure.
because with Script Summit it's basically like a page and a half of like
Yeah,
overarching stuff. So I think something a little
yeah,
bit more breakdown would be great, because I think that's part of it too. When you've spent so much time with something, it really helps to have different perspectives, like we were talking about, different feedback, different pass throughs,
absolutely.
different rewrites, all that good stuff. So
Oh
yeah,
yeah, I'm
looking
happy
forward
to
to it.
help.